And I've purposely put it at the last, as the last presentation of today's program, because I wanted to kind of build up to it in a way and see what people are currently already doing in terms of competencies, how they are working with it. Because the smart evidence functionality that we had put into Mahara 16.10 last year, so in October, is still very new. And so a lot of people will not have had the opportunity to take a closer look at it simply because you haven't been able to upgrade to that newer version. And so many will most likely do it this year. And so I thought, well, rather than showing what is possible right at the beginning before everybody does their thing, I thought, put it at the end and see how we can tie it back. Because by now you will have looked at a number of examples. We've seen some from Parijata and Mojito, and also other organizations. We've seen Kristine's portfolio, so that we now know kind of what portfolios look like. Especially those of you who are new to Mahara will have kind of an idea of what you can do in the portfolio, what you can put in there, what you can use it for, how you can track your competencies. And now I'd like to ask the question, how smart is your portfolio assessment? So is there something else that you could do? Is there something maybe that you're missing? And so this question was asked quite some time ago, now already in 2014, by Shane and Misty, who wanted to use portfolios also for assessment purposes, because there's teacher registration in the ACT and teacher registration in many other countries and states. And that was just one starting point, because we also have nurse registration, we have competencies, and for many, many professionals. And while Mahara is a portfolio, there is the assessment part. However, we are primarily a personal learning environment. So if you're going all the way back to this morning and thinking back to what Mark said, well, portfolio and assessment doesn't necessarily always go with each other. There's this really big tension, but in a way we do need to have assessment because universities and other organizations, professional associations, kind of depend on it, because we do also want to feel safe. And so how can we marry those two things together? And that's where we came up with smart evidence. So that was a project really initiated by the University of Canberra, who has been a long-term Mahara user, and we just thought, well, how can we make it happen in Mahara without really losing the Mahara identity? Because what we didn't want to become is a pure assessment portfolio or a learning management system. We really wanted to look at how can we bring in assessment so that we still have the portfolio, the personal learning environment portfolio, the focus on students, the focus on the learner, but still allow institutions to actually continue using Mahara because they can also work with assessment features. So kind of really also doing assessment in a way that is suitable for portfolio work, rather than just trying to slap on a grade. And that's kind of where smart evidence came in. So back in 2015, or for some of the portfolios that we saw earlier today, that's kind of what a standards-based portfolio looked like. This one is at the University of Canberra. So there you have your graduate standards, then you have reflections and your thinking around it, you can put media in, and so you have a regular Mahara page. The problem with that is that you don't really see where you are at. If you are a student and you have to comply with 12 standards, or in some cases even more, in nursing there, depending on the country, 120 or 160 or even more. So it's really hard to kind of click through 160 pages in order to get an overview of what have I already done, where I still need something, and where do I actually want feedback from my assessor. And so smart evidence will help with that. So fast forward from 2015 to end of 2016 and now, we'll have smart evidence which provides us with an overview. Brian, can we actually kill the lights a bit, please? Because I think...
Do you want to dim the lights?
Yes. Might be, is that a bit easier to see? Yeah. So what we really thought what is helpful is to have a visual overview of the competency framework, so that you can see in one go, what have I already done, where do I still need things, without really making it a checklist. Checklist. Because now on this matrix you can scroll easily through your pages and see, have I already provided evidence for a certain standard? Do I still need to provide evidence? Has somebody already looked at it? So I'll just walk you through this now very briefly. So what we see on this matrix page is the title of the framework. That is followed by a description. And you can manipulate all of these fairly easily and set up as many frameworks as you like on your Mahara instance. So these two things, the description and the title, they are set for every student. And then we actually get to the framework itself. There we can show categories of a framework so that we can divide the frameworks quite easily and nicely. And within that category, we have individual criteria. And then we can also see how many times a certain criteria has been met. So this is kind of for the people who really like reporting very much, so that they don't have to scroll through 20, 30, or 40 pages of portfolio, but can see it directly in one column. Has a student already finished with that standard, or do they still need to provide certain information? But now we are actually getting into the meat of things. Namely, the rest of the matrix is the portfolio itself. So we are working on the assumption that a smart evidence portfolio is a collection, because we want to still be able to organize the evidence that we have into individual meaningful units so that it's easy to find them. Because rather than having a very long page and then saying the third box from the top follows standard such and such, and the last one at the bottom right follows a different standard, we want to be able to still have short pages, but also still show evidence in context. And so every page that you add to a smart evidence collection is automatically added to that matrix, and you can associate it with a standard or with multiple standards. And then we can provide annotations, which are represented by a circle, so that you, as well as the assessor, know that you've provided evidence and that it's been annotated, so that you provided some information of why you think the evidence that you provided in that page meets this particular standard. Then an assessor can log in, look at your portfolio, look at your annotation, and make an assessment, and can say, yes, I agree with you that you've met this standard, or I don't agree with you, or you still need to work a little bit. So we have different icons for that, and they are augmented with little tooltips when you're on the desktop, so that you can also read a description of what it means when you get a green checkbox or a red cross or the yellow half moon. And now when we are kind of at the start of mapping a portfolio page to a competency standard, what you would click on is one of these gray bubbles, these gray circles, and the annotation block would come up. You can also add the annotation block directly on the page when you're already on the portfolio page, so you don't have to go back to the overview. But what you really do here is have a meta-reflection of what you put onto your page. So with the annotation, you can map your evidence, that particular page that you created, to the standards that you're looking at by providing a textual description, or you can also upload an image, for example. So in order for you not to have a PDF on the side, a second screen, or a printout of the standard document, you also get the criteria and description directly there. So we want to make it as easy as possible to work with the standard and to give people access to it without having to rifle through a lot of things. And once you have that, because you can see it, you can always tie your annotation, so your meta-reflection, back to the standard. making it very easy. And so once you've done that, the blue circle comes up and tells an assessor who has access to your collection that it is ready for assessment. So they don't need to go through 20, 30, or 40 pages of your portfolio and see where have you actually uploaded something, especially if you do give them access to the portfolio not just at the end of a term, but kind of throughout your portfolio creation process. Then they can kind of go in and see, okay, here's something that I haven't yet assessed. Or if you do give them access to your portfolio only at the end, they can still see which ones have I already looked at. Because when they start looking at your evidence, they would go to the page and then open up the annotation and provide feedback. And not just provide feedback, but also the assessment. So they can assess your evidence as it relates to that particular standard. Any other regular user, if they don't have staff permissions, can also provide feedback. So the regular Mahara functionality of providing feedback is also available for these standards. So you can also invite peer feedback. The only thing that your peers wouldn't be able to do is make an assessment, because that is restricted to instructors. And once they've given their assessment, the icons change depending on what they said and how they assessed your portfolio evidence. Now, what we've kind of just gone through is that you have your portfolio, which consists of artifacts. And as you know, in Mahara, you can provide feedback on an artifact. Then when you have your artifact, and that came out in an earlier presentation, is your portfolio only artifact-based, or do you also invite reflections? Ideally, a portfolio is not just an archive of all the files on a computer, but also added value to by the reflection of why you're actually putting that piece of evidence into your portfolio. Why is it important? Why do we want to keep it? And so you can also provide feedback on the reflection. So that's where the collaborative aspect comes in, where learning with others is possible, that you're not just allowing people to comment on the primary evidence, but also on the secondary sources that you have in there, on your own reflections, feedback on that. And now with Smart Evidence, we have another layer available to us where we can provide feedback, namely on the annotations. So the annotations don't really replace the reflections that you have in the portfolio. They're sitting on top of it as a meta-reflection, because the annotation would only relate to a certain standard, whereas your reflection might touch on many different standards, because oftentimes you're covering multiple things rather than just one. And the annotation is specific to a particular standard. And again, people can feedback on it. So there's always that feedback loop integrated, because we did not want to make it a tick box thing where you just say, yep, I've met the standard and that's it, but you don't really know why, or the assessor can't really leave any feedback and say how well they thought you met the standard, or whether you still need to work on things. So always being able to provide feedback and making it possible to store that feedback, make that visible and part of the portfolio is important. And so with the matrix page, you do have a very easy overview of where you are at, because immediately you see whether you've already provided evidence for a particular standard, and also whether an assessor has already looked at it. So it makes it faster in a lot of ways to do that, and to go through your portfolio and find relevant places where you still need to do some work. So we can see our progress quite nicely. And that will help to step students through, guide them through the portfolio creation process, because you as instructor or lecturer, as well as the students, can see quite quickly how much more is needed. So I could also imagine that, for example, for the boot camp, maybe not using it as a standard-based approach, but maybe just using smart evidence in a different way as tracking progress throughout the program. Because while it was built with competency frameworks in mind, it could be used for other things as well, because you're really free to create what you want in it. So maybe that's one easy step into building more visibility around progress in Mahara, getting to the point where we have more visualizations available for learners as well as instructors and assessors to see what is going on in the portfolio. But now, how do we set this thing up? Well, kind of looks frightening, but as we learned yesterday, it can be quite easy actually. So currently, the admin interface does not look pretty, it is just a text file. And it has lots of things that look like code and that most of the time we don't really want to look at. So I'm very grateful to Jim from Curtin University. You can't really see too much, but that's okay. Because he showed us an editor that makes this entire process much, much easier. So instead of seeing all the semicolons and all the quotation marks and all the syntax that is needed for Mahara to understand your competency framework, which is on the left, on the right-hand side you can actually have it in more human-readable format, so that you can very easily make any changes to an existing framework, adapt it for your own needs, and then have the file available. What you can also do in the framework is that you can change certain parameters. So we provide frameworks that have default settings in there, which you can adopt. And one very important one that you might want to consider is the assessment part. Because do you want to have an assessment, so where there's an external assessor, or do you want to allow your learners to self-assess themselves? Because in some cases you may not really need an external assessment, but you still want to make it possible for them to track their progress over time, to track their competencies, or to do a self-assessment and then just have their peers review what they have said. And so you can do that very easily in Smart Evidence simply by changing one word. So by changing self-assess from false to true. And in the editor that we saw earlier, it is even just ticking a box. So even much, much easier than that. So there's now, I think, a lot of opportunity for all of you working with competencies in your programs or starting to look to working with competencies and seeing, is that something that I would like to use in my institution? Is that something that I'd like to switch to? It is definitely not something that we say you have to use it. We love it so much you can't get around it. There's nothing that makes you use it. If you don't turn on the functionality, nobody will ever know that it exists on your Mahara instance. You do need to have at least Mahara 16.10 to use it, but eventually everybody will have upgraded to a newer version. But you certainly don't have to use it. If you are in an institution where you have, or at an organization where you work with one Mahara instance and have your faculties set up as individual institutions, then you could turn it on for the Faculty of Education, but leave it off for the engineers. So we really build flexibility around that so that there's no must for it, but so that you can use it. And of course you can set up multiple frameworks within the system in order to really give everybody what they need. You can also set up a Smart Evidence collection directly as a template collection. So if you're used to setting up site collections or institution collections, you can put Smart Evidence on it as well, and as soon as the students copy it, they get the matrix page directly with it. So you don't have to give them instructions on how to add that to their portfolio. But they can also retrofit their portfolios with Smart Evidence. So if they already have a collection in which they work with competencies and you allowed Smart Evidence, they can simply enable that for that collection and get the matrix page directly there without having to do much else.
And what about if you uploaded or you created your smart evidence and uploaded all the different competencies, and you do an upgrade, does it stay?
Yeah. So the question was whether the framework that you have set up stays when you upgrade your version of Mahara to a later version, and yes, it does. So the data is actually written to the database, so it doesn't go away from it. And as long as you don't turn off smart evidence, then it is still available and can be used.
What happens if you do turn it off? Do you lose it?
It becomes unavailable, and you can't really turn off or you can't delete a competency framework when people have used it in their portfolios. Yeah. So you can set a framework as inactive, and then everybody who has been using it can continue using it, but no new person can work with it. So this is really nice when you do want to make changes to your competency framework, but you need to keep on all the students who had already started with the old one because they started under different conditions, but don't want to make the old one visible to new students so they don't get confused, choose the wrong thing, and you have to kind of redo things afterwards. And so I think it is also not just an opportunity to kind of retrofit existing collections, but also rethink how you want to work with competencies with everyone in your organization. Because there's nothing that says you have to go with smart evidence way. You can continue perfectly fine with how you've been doing if that works for you. But I think it is a possibility to see, well, to review the program and see, has what we've been doing working for us? Should we be looking into something different? Is that something different smart evidence, or do we just need to treat something else and we get to the point where we want to be? So what's next for us? Well, lots of different possibilities. So what is currently in Mahara is a first iteration of smart evidence. So we looked at the long list of functionality that we have in a spreadsheet. After analysis, work with the University of Canberra, University of Wollongong, invitations of other people, and Stevens provided feedback as well from the nurse, from Bay of Plenty, DHB, and a bunch of other people. And so we know kind of a lot of things that we'd like to have in Mahara. But at some point we needed to say, well, we need to make a starting point. Because rather than only talking about it and you not being able to try it out, we thought, what is the minimum requirement that we would need and that we can put into Mahara so that it actually works, so that people can use it? Because now you have something available. It might not be perfect. It might not fit everybody's requirements, but it does get you somewhere. And so now we are waiting for your feedback and seeing, well, what should be improved in smart evidence to make it fit more of what you needed to do. And so hopefully over the next year and a half, we will have more of those conversations within the Mahara community, because now the Northern Hemisphere is going to upgrade over June till August. New Zealand and Australia have already oftentimes upgraded over our non-existing summer that has just morphed into winter. And so we are kind of slowly getting people starting to use smart evidence. And so we are really looking forward to that feedback and finding out, well, is it useful for you? What should be changed to make it even more useful? If you have already started using smart evidence and you're very willing, as we are all in the open source community, willing to share the work that you have done in the framework or the frameworks that you have set up, then please send them in. Easiest is probably if you just send them to me, because right now we only have a very limited space of where how we can upload things. There's no automatic way of where you can share your frameworks. But that way we can also take a quick look at it, put necessary changes, or kind of just some basic things that might need to be changed so that your institution is not mentioned in the framework as institution that is the only one able to use the framework, but that it's more generic. But we are very happy to share things. So all the frameworks that I've created, they are available for download under this URL already. And if you want to have yours listed there as well, please do send them in, because the framework doesn't change. No matter whether it's been set up, for example, for the by the College of Nurses for Nurse Portfolio, The framework for nursing is still the same that Unitec would need, or maybe the other way around. And AUT also has a nursing program, so why should 3, 4, or 5 different people in the same country set up the exact same framework when we can just have one person do it for everybody, and then you might want to make slight changes in it, but at least you have a good basis. And so kind of that sharing is really important, so that everybody kind of benefits from each other. Yes, if you don't already have my email address, you can find it here. It's either kristina@catalyst.net.nz or kristina@mahara.org works as well. Or you can send a Twitter message or message me on mahara.org if you're there, or any which other way that you have access to me to ask questions or to send me your framework files, and we'll be happy to include them. So now I think we might still have a little bit of time for any questions. Brenda.
With your assessment, are you able to have more than one assessor do the assessment, for example, a supervisor and a second assessor?
Yes, so that's possible. The only restriction that we currently have is that an assessor needs to have the staff role on Mahara, because it is seen as an assessment piece, and currently all assessment pieces require instructors to have the staff role. But as soon as you have that and you are in the institution where that student is, then you can assess them happily away. And the nice thing is also, as soon as you change the status of the assessment, that is being tracked, and the students can't delete that. So we will see when you made an assessment, Brenda, when Delani changed it to partially meeting the criteria, and when Stephen gave the okay. But then if you come back and you say, no, Stephen, don't really agree, you can change it back, and you can actually have a discussion with Stephen why you think it is still on the partial path and not yet fully met. So all that is tracked, because that is oftentimes important for the assessment part, that you kind of have a trace of what has been before, not that the student kind of doesn't tell you that they were actually still supposed to do something and you just assume otherwise. Naomi. So the question was whether we can change a smart evidence collection from the framework directly from self-assessment up to a point, and then also have the external assessment. And currently that is not possible. So you would either set up a framework as external assessment or a self-assessment framework. And once you have added annotations to your smart evidence collection, you can't change the frameworks anymore. That is just to prevent kind of wrongdoings of students that they could get into. But that is actually an idea that we should be adding to the spreadsheet of our features, because that might come up at some other point as well, so that you have more of the process for the students while they're working on it, and then in the end you could have a full assessment by an instructor. Mm-hmm. Any other? Anne?
You just mentioned there that the assessors need to have the staff role. In our case at the DHB, those assessors, if we gave them the staff role, they would also be submitting a portfolio. So would that affect that? We don't have a split role. The assessors
yeah.
also be
They can also still submit their portfolio, and then it would be their peer who could assess. Yeah.
Technically, they could assess themselves.
I can't remember whether I've tested that or not. Shouldn't be possible.
You can't self-assess your own stuff, so you would be another peer that would do
yeah. So if Robert remembers his code correctly, I'm just kind of saying it for the recording here, even though if you have the staff role, you should not be able to self-assess yourself, because the framework is not set to self-assessment, but you can immediately assess somebody else. Yeah. So right now, if you take a look at the functionality, it is set up without all the complexities that a lot of organizations have. because we wanted to get the functionality out and get feedback like this and see where we would actually need to make changes, rather than trying to accommodate everybody and kind of giving you the functionality in 2020. We really wanted to get it out quite quickly and build on top of that. And so one of the things that could come up in the future is have more reporting for the organization. Have reporting across learners and not just on a per learner basis. Have the possibility to combine multiple smart evidence collections into a bigger one and then visualize the results. So at the University of Canberra, that is currently done more the manual way in a spreadsheet. But you have spider graphs where you see, okay, I was here at the beginning of, after 4 weeks, then after 8 weeks in term time, I shifted my competencies and I have grown, and so on and so forth. And so there's lots of possibilities, and since everything is in a database, we can interrogate it and we can make different views of things. We just need to get around doing it and have your input of what we should be focusing on next. Stephen?
I'm just thinking about different institutions, like say having sort of faculty-based institutions instead of one big one for a whole union.
Yeah.
Does that create any problems in terms of, let's say, we take a student who's doing a major in business, but they do one education paper, and those two institutions are separate? Can the student who's doing the major in business, when they do their one education paper and they've got an e-portfolio which is in the business institution, but the education lecturer has set an e-portfolio task, can you see what I'm getting at?
Yes, I know what you're getting at. So the question, I hope I can paraphrase that because it's really tricky to do. The question is basically, if you have one Mahara instance and divided all your faculties into individual institutions, whether a business student can create a competency-based portfolio when they are taking a paper in the education faculty, which is a different institution, and still be assessed. Kind of the short version, I think. I might have left out some details there. Yes, you can. Currently, that would there are two ways. Either you make the education framework available to everybody on your instance, so that any business student can see it, because the portfolios that we create on Mahara are not institution-based. They are portfolio. They're your portfolio. You just happen to be in the Faculty of Business rather than the Faculty of Education. So that is one way. The other way is that you actually put the student into both institutions. Then you can still show only the business portfolios to all the business students, and the education portfolios are only available to the students also being enrolled in education courses. But because the student is in both,
Has dual identity.
Exactly, has dual identity, they would see both frameworks. And I think from Mahara 1704 on, it will be possible that you can see smart evidence frameworks when you're in multiple institutions, because that is not possible in Mahara 16.10. That is a change that we are making for 1704 because we realize that we should actually make it possible to do so. Beth?
You showed that in the annotations directed from the matrix. Where do those annotations go? Can you put them as an item on a page?
Yes. So what's happening, and for that I think I'll just quickly go into a portfolio itself, is that the annotation lives with the portfolio. So here we are seeing the smart evidence collection for a British portfolio, the HE Fellowship. And if I have my annotation here, and it has also already been assessed by one of my assessors. So when I click on the portfolio itself, on that portfolio page, the annotations are directly there. So you can access the annotations from the matrix page, but if you're looking at the portfolio evidence, you also have the annotations right there.
And it loads them automatically.
It loads them automatically because they are an artifact. They become part of that portfolio, so they need to live on that page. And so you can place feedback directly there. You can see the feedback that has been left. You can move the annotations around on the page like any other block you like, so that you can also just go to your matrix page, do all your annotations, meta-reflections, and then go back into the portfolio and move them around if you think, well, they should be sitting to the right of this piece of evidence rather than below it. So it's a regular artifact that you can use because it needs to be part of the portfolio. And if a student deletes an annotation, then it's gone from the matrix page automatically.
Okay.
Yes. Because then they kind of said, I don't want to have it assessed for that. So instead of having a red cross, they might just want to say, well, I'm not adding this, or this portfolio page is not actually meeting the standard, so I could remove it rather than seeing the red parts there. And that's why we are placing multiple annotation blocks onto a page, so that you could remove the annotation for standard 1, but still have the feedback for annotation 2 there, rather than saying, here's my annotation around everything, and then having to fiddle out which feedback actually goes with what you have said. So it's very granular so that you can be flexible in what you keep on the portfolio and what you want to remove. Dilani, I think that's the last question, so we can go.
So when students, let's say they mark that they have met this competencies, and then let's say the assessor comes in, and do students have to submit it to be able to get assessments each time, or how does that happen?
So the question is whether students have to submit their portfolio in order for it to be assessed, and the answer is no. They can, but they don't. So you can work in both ways. You can give the assessor access to the portfolio via Shared by Me, so that they can access it at any point in time, and you can continue working on your portfolio. Or you can submit your portfolio into a group or into Moodle so that it gets locked, you can't make any changes, and then the assessor looks at it. So it is independent of that submission aspect really, but does get locked if you're working with that functionality. Thank you so much for all your questions, and I really look forward to seeing people try it out. Give it a go and let us know how you get on with it, so that we actually know whether we built something that is useful for you or not. Thank you, and see you at the back.